99% of the research at the moment is looking at what's wrong, as in what's not going well, whether it's in the workplace or whatever only 1% of the research in the last 12 months has looked at what are people doing that's right, that's working. And I can guarantee right now, there are millions and millions and millions and millions of people in the world doing nice things, doing good things, doing heroic things, doing kind things, trying to be the best parent they can be, trying to be the best friend, the best daughter, whatever, husband, whatever it is. There are thousands, millions of other people doing that. We never hear about them on the news.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium show. And I'm delighted to be here, delighted that you're here, and delighted to have my guest. My guest today is Sue Langley, who is the CEO and founder of the Langley Group. And hello, Sue, how are you today?
I'm very well, Lawrence. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good that you're here. I love that picture behind you. Sunflowers always have a very positive impact on me. They bring back loads of memories. And where are you today? Like, where are you speaking to us from?
Well, I'm speaking to you from my little office in Byron Bay, or just outside Byron Bay. And I will just tell you, my painting that you mentioned, it is a painting, not a...
Okay, it's a painting.
And it came from San Gimignano in Italy by a painter with a local studio there. And to your point, it makes me very happy because whilst I can't get back to Italy right now, at least I can look at my sunflowers.
Wow. So let's kind of start. So clearly you're in Byron Bay, but I can tell you're not a local Byron Bay person. So tell us your story. Tell us your backstory. How did you come to be the CEO and founder of the Langley Group? And for those of the listeners who are not familiar with the Langley Group, I'd love you to just share what the Langley Group is and what you do as a business.
Okay, well, if you can tell by my accent, I'm originally from the UK, and I've been in Australia for 20 plus years now, admittedly not that long in Byron Bay, so yeah, maybe it might take me a while to be a local, but came out here about 20 years ago, and I love Australia. I love living here. I love the lifestyle, but actually the opportunities links to why I set up the Langley Group. So being from the UK, from a not particularly wealthy environment, from a family where nobody went to university, family of farmers and servants, really. And in Australia, in the UK, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to do what I do now because I didn't go to university, I didn't have a degree, I didn't know the right people, I didn't go to the right schools or anything like that. So starting my own business in this sort of space probably would have been more difficult. But thankfully, I came to Australia for a year, traveled around, loved it, ended up coming back and living here. And I think it gave me the opportunity here in Australia to start my business, which I had formulated in my head before I left. But after a couple of jobs here, I decided to start the Langley Group. And we've been going for over 20 years now. And we focus on the practical application of positive psychology, emotional intelligence, and neuroscience. And it's really important to us that we focus on the science, the research, the evidence. But we basically, what do? We run lots of leadership programs, culture type programs, wellbeing programs, and it's all based on those three sciences. And I think I wouldn't have had the opportunity to start my business and be as successful as it is if I'd have probably started it in the UK. Whereas here, I think people were able to give me a chance even before I got my degree. So whilst I have now got a degree in psychology and management, I've got a master's in neuroscience of leadership. I've studied at Harvard. I've studied at the Neuroscience School for Advanced Studies. I think Australia gave me more of a chance than I perhaps would have had in the UK.
That's interesting. Why do you think that? A lot of people have said that to me, actually, that Australia is more of an environment that encourages entrepreneurial spirit. And clearly that you've benefited from that and agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me here, even though I didn't know anybody, when I started my own business, I hadn't come out of a consulting firm where I knew how it worked, etc. I had a bit of a belief that if I did a good job, people would recognize that without worrying about what university I'd been to, or did I go to the right graduate program, or had I worked for the big four, etc. And yes, it probably took me longer than other people who had done those things. But I think it was a good thing. Somebody once said to me when I was starting my own business, I was lamenting the fact that I still had no clients and nothing was working, you know, having one of those bad days. And I said, you know, everybody else I meet who starts their own business has come out of their own consulting, or have come out of a consulting business to start their own consulting business. And usually their first client is the consulting business that they worked for that they consult back to. And I said, I don't know how it works. I don't know how anything works around this. And the gentleman I was talking to said, maybe that's a good thing.
So interesting. So interesting. So 20 years of being in business. I mean, that's so, thank you for sharing the start of the journey. And how has it evolved in 20 years? Because when you look at the context of well-being, particularly in a workplace, it's completely different now, or I perceive it to be different to what it was. So how has it changed? How has your business changed as the market has changed? And I guess we've become much more aware of the importance of well-being as the foundation of everything.
Yeah, so when I first started, it was really focusing on the emotional intelligence. I was certified in the Mesquite, the emotional intelligence test from Mayor Salavi Caruso. And I really sort of started in that sort of area, and then studied positive psychology. And I realized that positive psychology and emotional intelligence really interlink. They're sort of two halves of an orange, I suppose. And so really understanding how to manage our emotions, how to handle our emotions, how to experience our emotions is really critical to thriving in life. And then I did my master's in neuroscience of leadership. And for me, putting the neuroscience behind well-being, putting the neuroscience behind leadership was really critical for me, for my own brain to understand, how does this work? I didn't want the soft and fluffy. I didn't want the, oh, this should work just because. I wanted to know what happened in the brain. So for me, it was about bringing those three things together. And I appreciate now many people are doing it, but 20 years ago, we were probably one of the few that were doing that. And I think how it's evolved, obviously from a business perspective, as many people, it was just me when I started my business, you know, the Langley Group was Sue Langley. But since then, we've grown, we've shifted and morphed our business model in numerous ways. Obviously, I have a lovely team. I have people all around the world, which is really nice. And the most important thing for me is due to COVID, actually, I'm grateful in some ways that it really made me rethink my business model again. And we now have Langley Group certified trainers all around the world delivering our amazing content. And that's a brilliant sort of shift through as a business model that I couldn't employ many people before. There's a limit to how many people you can employ if they're bringing in business, etc. But now we've got people from all around the world who are choosing, because of the quality of our content, they're choosing to get trained up and certified in our programs so that they can go and deliver it within their organizations or to many organizations. And I love that. I love seeing the ripple effect all around the world of the impact of what we do.
That's amazing. Yes, you've got like an army of trained well-being champions around the world who are championing well-being in those three areas that interconnect. Could you just expand on what each of those topics are for people who are, say, emotional intelligence? We understand it's emotions, but positive psychology. Some people won't be as familiar with positive psychology. So I'd love you to explain what positive psychology is in particular, neuroscience as well, but, you know, the study of the brain. But again, some people won't be exactly familiar of how those unique areas, what they focus on and why it's important that they come together.
Yeah, so well, if I start with emotional intelligence just briefly, again, some people think they know what emotional intelligence is and they've come across Daniel Goleman's book or the model, etc. But I like to go to the science of emotions and basically how do we use our emotions intelligently. And there's hundreds of years of research into the science of emotions. So we look at emotional intelligence from the physiology, what happens to you physically when you experience emotions, what happens in your brain and how you use those emotions intelligently. And most importantly, my phrase is how you get there quicker. Because people who are higher in emotional intelligence based on the Mesquite test, which is the only abilities-based test, people who score higher in the test basically get there quicker. What does that mean? It means if something happens and you have an emotional response, for instance, or you have to deal with an emotional issue or a social issue, as in something between two people, Everyone will get there. Everyone will figure out what the better option would be in order to respond to an emotional situation. But people higher in emotional intelligence get there quicker. Well, I don't know about you. I think that's a really important thing. So when you're with your children and they do something and you kind of lose the plot, you realize maybe a day later what you should have done. If you're a leader and somebody is falling apart in front of you and you don't handle it very well, and you realize 2 days later probably what you should have said, people higher in emotional intelligence get there quicker. So for me, that's what it's about, is how do I train myself and learn these skills so I get there quicker. Neuroscience is really the science of not just the brain, but the neurological system. And again, we bring all of that in, such as the microbiome. So I mentioned I went to the Neuroscience School for Advanced Studies. I was lucky enough to spend 3 weeks with leading neuroscientists around the world, including Nobel Prize winners. It was way above my head, but it was brilliant because I learned all about the microbiome and how it links to well-being, and how, not just from a pop psychology book, but from actual research of what's going on right now. And so I like to bring in the neuroscience of how the neurotransmitters in our brain will influence whether we perceive stress as positive or negative, about how change occurs, what happens in the brain when we make decisions, when we're self-regulating, social neuroscience. So trying to bring that into the mix. And then, as you said, positive psychology for me is the science of human flourishing. And it's really important that, again, I think of it as positive psychology, in that it's the scientific study of human flourishing. And what does that mean? It's about individuals, teams, organizations. So if you look at positive organizational scholarship, it's how organizations flourish and thrive. And I love just taking what the science is telling us. I was reading a research paper this morning on looking at 170 countries. Over 4 million people were part of this study, where they looked at pro-social behavior and the impact on satisfaction with life, positive emotion, negative emotion, and stress levels, and looked at what's the difference between affluent nations versus poorer nations, etc. And I love being able to share that with people. And I read it this morning, and then I shared it on one of our Learn with Sue sessions at 9 o'clock this morning, so that we can give people this learning, so that we can share, well, what does it mean for us when we bring the science to life?
Because there's so many studies that are hidden, and the individual doesn't have access, and we're all struggling with all the things that you talk about in your courses. And I'd love you to now expand. So some of the people, I mean, clearly we're both speaking to each other this morning, and we're in a situation of lockdown, a lot of change that that's been lasting now, getting on for 2 years. So I was reading a study that just shows how emotionally exhausted we all are, effectively, because there's been a lot of change. But some people are flourishing, and I think so. And we were talking once before about the fact that we can easily make generalizations across sweeping generalizations, assuming that everybody's suffering. But in truth, that isn't the case. And I'd love you to just share some of the areas where people are flourishing during some of these challenging and changing times.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Lawrence, because one of the things that we hear all the time, if we're looking at, I don't know, social media, the news, whatever we often hear the negative. We hear mental health issues are going to increase. It's the next pandemic, and everybody's suffering, and everybody's this. And we hear all these, as you say, those sweeping generalizations. But I think one thing that's really important to understand, and I can guarantee most people do not know this, 99% of the research at the moment is looking at what's wrong, as in what's not going well, whether it's in the workplace or whatever Only 1% of the research in the last 12 months has looked at what are people doing that's right, that's working. 1%, literally, that's what people focus on. So of course you're hearing all the negative in the news. Of course we're hearing this because they're the headlines. But when you look at the 1%, there's some amazing studies coming out, literally from all over the world. Again, I was reading one this morning for our session, and it was about the countries that have really managed to communicate well in line with self-determination theory of people's basic psychological needs and how that's helped. There was one that came out fairly recently with a meta-analysis of 22 studies from 22 different countries that found, well, when we look at the people who are flourishing, the people who've experienced post-traumatic growth, for instance, during this, what is it that they're doing? And I don't know about you and the people listening to this, but I want to know that. I want to know, what are the people doing that are flourishing so I can do it, so maybe I can stay flourishing. And some of the fabulous things are pro-social behavior, what people often think of as random acts of kindness. Pro-social behavior builds your sense of competence because you feel competent when you do it. It builds your sense of autonomy because you are choosing to do something in line with your values, your interests, etc. And it builds your relatedness, as in your, not only people think of relatedness as your ability to connect to people, which it partly is, but it's actually also about your ability to feel that you are a contributing human being. So if you think about that, a simple act of pro-social behavior actually fulfills those basic psychological needs. It's a huge buffer against stress, doing something for somebody else. It increases positive emotions, it decreases negative emotions, and in most countries, it also improves life satisfaction. Wow. So why wouldn't we want to do one of these tiny little things, one thing every day, that is considered pro-social behavior? And yes, we might have to push ourselves out of our comfort zone to do it, but why wouldn't we want to? You mentioned other things, what other things? Things like utilizing your strengths. So people who are tapping into their strengths consciously have actually been found to be a good buffer against adversity and lead to post-traumatic growth. A sense of meaning. So not the sense of meaning where I've been hit by a lightning bolt and I've got my sense of meaning in life, but actually the sense of meaning that comes again from the research that says, where am I finding meaning in what I do? I could go for a walk on the beach and I could find meaning in what I'm doing, or I can just go for a walk on the beach. So we know from research that human beings create meaning anyway. So why don't we create it around the positive of what we can learn from this, what we can do with this? Gratitude was another one, what they call interpersonal connection. So those moments of laughter, those moments of joy, even if we can't see people face to face, you and I are having a positive interpersonal connection right now. I feel I'm having it with everyone who's listening. So all of those little tiny moments. And again, there was many more, but there were these really little things that if we embed in our life every day, it helps. And I will just say, just adding on to that, also from a brain perspective, eat, sleep, exercise. Your brain needs you to do that too.
Yeah, they're kind of basics, aren't they? But we often don't get those things wrong. Sometimes I think like the whole system's pushing us in the wrong direction. It's interesting what you say about the research. 99% is focused on negativity, and I know in the whole health space, we spend a lot of research studying disease, but we don't study the healthy people. What are they doing so we can actually spread that? Why do you think that is? Is there something about the human condition that really engages with the negativity? I mean, the newspapers clearly and the news channels focus on that rather than positive news, because that clearly sells newspapers. So there must be something within our brains or within our makeup, if you like, that seems to attract that kind of fear. Otherwise, we wouldn't be using it in the way we are.
Yeah, it's really interesting, again, when you look at the research, and there are many things around this. So when you look at how the brain is wired, we know we have 5 times more neurons dedicated to a threat response than a reward response. So we're already primed for that threat response. We're primed for the negative emotions of anger and fear and disgust, etc. Of course we are. It's potentially life-saving, if you like. So we do have that negativity bias, but I think it's also to do with the culture of what we have created as human beings. We've created this environment. I was looking at a study again a few weeks ago that looked at the news and looked at the news in general, and the graph literally went almost at a 90-degree angle of how negative news reports have increased over the last, it was from back in 1950. So what's that, sort of 70 years. And it was huge.
Really? That's so interesting. Yeah.
But what's interesting in the last 12 months around the pandemic is the fact that only 1% is focused on the positive. And unfortunately, what that means is it biases our language, it biases our mindset. if you think about the things you hear on the news, it's usually somebody doing something wrong, a tragedy, a crash, a negativity, some bad person doing something. And our brains sort of feed on that. But to your point that we've spoken about before is it makes us anxious, it makes us fearful, it makes us angry, it generates more negative emotions. But think about this for a moment. I can guarantee right now there are millions and millions and millions and millions of people in the world doing nice things, doing good things, doing heroic things, doing kind things, trying to be the best parent they can be, trying to be the best friend, the best daughter, whatever, husband, whatever it is. There are thousands, millions of people doing that. We never hear about them on the news. Who reports on them? Us having a conversation right here and now, trying to spread some of this learning around. That's not going to be on the news cycle, but there are lots and lots of people all doing that sometimes gets missed.
No, thank you for that. So what would be your advice when we're in this environment and we are bombarded by negative news? So one advice is don't watch the news, but the risk of that is you become ignorant to what's really happening. So it's that balance, and that can create anxiety as well in terms of fear of missing out on some of those things. But I'd love you to, from your perspective, to share what you would advise people to do during these times where we are there's a lot of moving parts, if you like. It's a very fluid situation, and people are anxious and are picking up on the negative news. They're feeding it, and they're getting an like a biased view of what the situation is. And I really understand that and appreciate you sharing that with us. But what can we do from a balance point of view to live in this world? Because one thing is we just turn off the news, we don't want, and we suddenly live in a cocoon, and that's very attractive at times. Other times we actually want to know what's happening so we can make a positive difference and try and help people and reframe people's way that they look at things, and recognize that there's two sides to everything. So whilst there is a lot of negativity, and that's the case with everything, there is a duality. There's a lot of challenge, a lot of negativity, but there are lots of positive things as well, and it depends on which side you actually look at. What would you say to someone who is feeling anxious, and when you say don't watch the news, they're like, well, I've got to watch the news because I won't know what's happening, and I don't want to know what. So it becomes this ripple effect of anxiety.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I always come back to the science. So I'll give you what the science tells me. And I treat myself as a scientific experiment, use the science and see what happens. So lots of research will tell you that watching the news makes you anxious. So my first piece of advice is turn it off. To your point is, if you then feel like, but I need to know what's going on. Absolutely. I'm not suggesting you that we live in a cocoon. What I am saying is choose your source and stick to it. So for instance, on my phone, I have saved a couple of websites that are the government websites. So I've got the New South Wales one, I've got a UK one because I've got clients over there. I've got a New Zealand one, I've got it saved. So I just know what's going on. I can look at it. I look at it periodically to go, okay, what's the new rules? Fantastic. Now I still hear about things. You're still going to hear about things from other people. Of course you are. But the key thing is, listen to your own body and your brain when you've finished watching the news, because and I've had this conversation with my husband, is he watches the news and whatever and that's great, that's up to him, but every so often he'll get really, really angry and frustrated, and I say, so how is that helping you? It's not. I'm like, okay, let's turn it off for a while, shall we? So just ask yourself, is it serving you right now? And you can still get your sources from very unemotive sources. If you go to a government website, it'll just tell you in black and white what your rules are, what you need to do.
Yeah, it's factual.
Without all the horrendous and the drama. So that's my one sort of thought, again, based on the science. But the other thing is, and again, I talk to people about this all the time, is if you are feeling stressed, anxious, worried, etc., sometimes people are looking for an answer. But if I say to most human beings, you've got 3 minutes to go and do something that makes you feel happy, fulfilled, whatever you've got 3 minutes, go do it. Everybody knows what to do. Everybody knows that whether it's go and pat your dog, hug your cat, laugh with your kids, dance with your partner, do 25 star jumps in the corner of your room, go and have the sun on your face, make a cup of tea mindfully, practice your mindfulness. Thousands and thousands of different things. We all know them. The problem is we're not doing them. And this is what I say about positive psychology. It's not a spectator sport. You can't know this stuff. You have to do this stuff.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. Yeah, and I think what you also touch on is the importance of those tiny things that really change your experience of each and every day. Just feel that all the things you listed are tiny things that we often take for granted, but they are within our control. And what you say, I find personally very empowering, because you can choose how you feel. You know, you don't have to be aware of everything that's happening at any point in time, because it's not going to make you feel good. So you're choosing. So like ultimately, if you choose to watch the news, you're choosing to bring on the emotion that's going to induce. And it sounds kind of obvious, and once you become aware of it, then you can take action and decide where to put your energy, and where to put your attention, so that you can feel better despite what's actually happening around you.
Yeah, and to your point, Lawrence, also choose your news wisely. So sometimes people say to me, "Oh, my Facebook feed is so, negative," or the other, whichever social media platform you're on. And it's really interesting. It's like mine's really positive, because I've chosen the things that I want to be, and I've chosen how frequently I spend. I literally 15 minutes a day. That's it, and then my Facebook and my Instagram and that cuts off. So I don't get caught up in it. But the other thing we do know from a research perspective, and links to your point just there, is when I feel I have some sense of control. So we know brains don't like uncertainty. Our brain has a threat response when we feel uncertain. When we get certainty back again, we get a reward response. We get a bit of dopamine release that makes us go, "Oh, that's good." So at the moment, there's lots of uncertainty. But one of the key ways to get certainty back again is autonomy. It's control. It's what can I do right now? Now, you and I know that booking a holiday right now, probably not a good idea. And we can get stressed about that. I've just had to cancel my 50th birthday celebration that we've been planning for 10 years.
Oh, golly.
It is what it is, I have control. And so therefore I can go, right, it's going to be cancelled. I'm not going to think about it until this is kind of opened up. So it's done, it's dusted. And my brain goes, "Oh, okay, bang, tick, done." Now I can focus on, it's not fair. We've been planning this for 10 years. I'm never going to get to go. I can focus on that. Or I can also go, do you know what? It will come. I might be 51. Who knows by the time it happens. But also I'm thinking about, I have been lucky enough to travel to probably 70% of the countries in the world with my job. I am so lucky that I've been able to do that. Now, I appreciate other people might not be grateful for that, but I can guarantee every single one of us listening to this has things you can be grateful for. It might be tiny things that the sun's shining today. It might be tiny things that it's raining today, and you get to feel the rain on your face. It all depends on how you frame it. And one of our wonderful diploma students, I've grabbed her idea, but we were doing a session on goals for the end of the diploma, and she framed a goal about losing weight or exercise or something or other. And by the time she'd reframed it using the science that we do, part of her goal was to go out for a walk or run every morning and say hello to the weather. And I've grabbed that phrase because it's a really beautiful way of reframing. Rather than laying in bed because it's cold and it's wet and whatever I'm going to get out and I'm going to say hello to the weather this morning. And when you think about that reframe and taking control, it automatically makes us feel better. So even the tiny things.
I love that. I think that's wonderful. I mean, I've certainly experienced that. Like you're saying, pre-pandemic, I was going to the UK twice a year. And now, of course, what I've realized is that all of that planning, like travel takes a lot of planning and booking and, without the actual travel itself. But of course, suddenly you've got a lot more time. And one thing I have noticed, because I run a lot, is I've just noticed flowers, and I've been taking photographs of flowers and things like that. And there's such wonder. And it reminded me, I did it this morning actually, and it reminded me of when my son was really young, and I took him. We were living in London at the time, and we went up, and everything he noticed, and I thought, my God, that's so interesting. It's exactly what you said before. It's like there's so much to be grateful for that is surrounding us, but we ignore it. You know, we don't actually see the flowers. We don't notice the wonder of nature that's all around us, and we choose to focus on the things that we can't do, as opposed to what we can do, and appreciate the world around us. So that's certainly been a positive impact on my experience over the last couple of years, simply because I've had to slow down, and I've had a lot more time, you know, instead of rushing around from airport to airport and planning, you're suddenly able to spend more time in the garden, in nature, and experience that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting if you think about what the lockdowns can do, is it can induce a potential sense of boredom. You know, I've heard the phrase Groundhog Day a number of times. You know, we feel that. But again, it depends on how we approach it. I'm like you, I go for a walk. So I have a beach literally sort of 3 minutes away. And I walk pretty much the same walk every morning, but it's never the same walk, because there's a wallaby on it one morning. There's a nudibranch. If you've never come across a nudibranch, oh my God, they're so cool. Are you paying attention? Are you really there? Are you really present? And again, when it comes down to some people saying, oh, I've got more time. Well, okay, are you wasting that time and getting bored, binge watching Netflix or whatever it happens to be, or are we using that time? And again, if you think about what self-determination theory talks about, which is these basic psychological needs of competence, relatedness, and autonomy, those people that are flourishing are using some of that learning to help them when they're potentially got more time and bored. So think about what that might mean. I might use my competence by learning something new. Now, for me, over the last 3 months, I've started learning Italian. I'm not that good at it yet. And I've hit a plateau where I was ready to give up 3 times. And it's using my competence, it's stretching myself. But I might also, and again, this has happened with me and my family. My family are in a different state, so I don't get to see them. And it's really interesting. We've got a lot more creative with our interactions. So previously I would fly to Adelaide, I would have a meal with them, and I would come home. But now we catch up on a Sunday afternoon. We're all on Zoom. We play Yahtzee, which is hilarious because my parents have no idea. My dad says, I got 5 ones. I'll put down 5. And I'm like, Dad, that's Yahtzee. That's the point of the game. So he, you know, it's hilarious. We crack up. I sent them all cupcakes. So all of my family in 3 different houses, I sent them all cupcakes, and then we all shared that for a birthday celebration. So that's relatedness. I'm still connecting. So I think it's an interesting one, that what are we choosing to do with this time? Are we choosing to be present? Are we choosing to learn? Are we choosing to grow? Are we choosing to settle down and not feel like we're rushing? Are we choosing the things that are important to us? And are we doing it consciously as opposed to having it done to us?
No, I love that. And going back to that first point around uncertainty, is you can make each day certain. So even though we're kind of worried, and, you know, and granted, a lot of people's lives have been completely disrupted in terms of business, and, you know, it's horrendous in terms of that level of disruption and change that people are doing. But even in that context, you can still create certainty. I mean, we through Wellbeing at Work, we run, you know, in-person conferences. So clearly not a great business in a pandemic to be in, but creativity loves constraints. And that was one of my big learnings, is that you couldn't, you know, we were planning a big conference in Singapore, and in the end that obviously didn't happen. So then we could have easily focused on the waste of effort and, you know, all the energy that went into planning, but we just had to focus on what can we do. And there's something very energizing about that, actually, when you are given these constraints, you really focus. And it's very similar to what you said with your family, is that it'd be nice to go and have dinner with them, but you can't. So you're being like super creative in terms of what you are doing to make sure you do connect, because I think connection is such an important aspect of well-being.
Yeah, and just actually, can I pick up on that, Lawrence?
Yeah,
Because,
please.
again, this is a really interesting scenario of what's happened in the media. So there's a lot of media that's reported on a couple of studies about Zoom fatigue. So literally, there's only been a few, and one of them I read had 8 people in it, and one had 14. So they're not exactly the most robust yet. But anyway, it talks about Zoom fatigue, if everybody's getting Zoom fatigue and whatever. Okay, the minute I buy into that idea of Zoom fatigue, I don't want to be on this call. But think about it again, if we sort of flip the way we're thinking. Right now, if we didn't have the technology we have, whether it's Zoom or Teams or whatever you're using, we wouldn't be able to do the amazing things that we're doing, such as this, such as, again, talking to your family in a different way. You might have been doing a phone call before where you don't see them, but now you're on a Zoom call or something. It changes things. And it's really interesting to me that everybody's going, oh, isn't it terrible? Oh, it's terrible. We're rushing from meeting to meeting. We were doing that anyway. We were just moving from room to room. We can either think of it as bad, or we can think of it as, how lucky are we that we have this technology? Like you, I have family in the UK. My husband has family in the UK. I haven't seen them in a while. My mother-in-law passed away during COVID. No chance of going to the funeral. But how lucky are we that we got to see it and attend virtually? And again, it's really interesting perception of, I can sit and whinge about it and go, it's not fair, I need to be on a plane, etc. Or I can go, okay, it is what it is. What can I control? What can I do? And to your point, I'm very well aware so many people have been impacted in really challenging ways. One of our clients I remember talking to lost 11 members of her family thanks to COVID. 11. I don't even have 11 members of my family. So I know the devastation that it's caused. And I'm not saying these little things are going to cure everything. They're not suddenly going to get you your job back. They're not suddenly going to put $1 million in your bank account or whatever you. But I tell you what, they're still going to work if we practice them.
Yes, no, I completely agree with that. And just underlining that point, they will help you remain balanced and well, and that helps you. And if you're well and you've got the energy to solve those problems, and that's very much what drove me to become so focused on well-being right at the start, because I thought, if I'm ill, then I'm not good. That's where my energy will go in terms of getting better. Whereas if I'm well, then you can solve the problems. You can earn the money again. You can do whatever challenge that's in front of you. One last question, just around science, because your whole approach is very much evidence based. One thing that I'm very aware of, probably growing up as a marketer, is you can be very selective with science, and sometimes I've seen a lot of, we talked about Facebook, but a lot of irresponsible use of science, and it's not real science, because people don't seem to, dig into the study and realize there's only 10 people, but they take the conclusion and then it becomes a fact, as opposed to, the real essence of science is that there's a study that has shown this, but there are other studies that may have shown the complete opposite. So I'd love you to maybe comment just on how we as consumers or as workplace well-being leaders can really make sure that we're using good science to make our decisions, as opposed to like everything science but it's not all equal. So
it's a really good question. Yeah. And one of the things, so if I take one of these Zoom studies, and my apologies, I can't remember which one it was, whether it was the 8 or the 14, but it looked at sticking little electrodes on people's brains, measuring brainwaves when they went through 4 Zoom meetings, and they either had 4 Zoom meetings back to back, or 2, then a 15-minute break, then 2. And it showed absolutely that with a break in between the 4, as in 2 and 2, your brain got a chance to refresh itself. Well, of course it does. I mean, that's just logic. If you were running from one face-to-face meeting to another, you would have the same thing. That's just that's what we've known for years, that your dopamine levels drop when you're thinking, etc. So it's like, but people see these little pretty pictures and they go, ooh, it was like literally either 8 or 14 people. So we need to be careful of that. There's no replication. We also know that nobody in real life has sat through 4 meetings with electrodes on their head to see what happens. So then we look at the other end of the sort of spectrum. So as I say, the study I was reading this morning, 4 million people across 170 countries. That's a little bit more robust. It's giving us a little bit more information, but also it comes on the back of literally hundreds of studies in different countries on similar themes. So we're definitely getting a little bit more that we can say, okay, pro-social behavior absolutely does make a difference. We've got hundreds of studies that show this. I'll give you a classic example, mindfulness, meditation. Meditation is a big area of study in positive psychology. It's a huge area of study, thousands and thousands of research papers. Majority of what we hear is that mindfulness makes things better. It's a good strategy from a wellbeing perspective. And there are, again, thousands of studies that will tell you with a control group and an experimental group, after 8 weeks of practicing mindfulness, woohoo, experimental group has improvements in whatever, blood pressure, stress, sleep, whatever it happens to be. What's really interesting is there's also a percentage of studies, probably about 40%, that will say it makes no difference. So literally, control group, experimental group, they do it for 8 weeks, nothing, no difference. Doesn't make it worse for you, but it doesn't have a result. But we don't hear about those because there's a null hypothesis, if you like. But the interesting thing, and I'll use mindfulness as this example, there's really only a couple of studies that will tell you it makes it worse. Literally only a few that will say it makes it worse. So if you're going to practice mindfulness, chances are you're going to get better results. So try it. If you don't, you're probably going to get no result. Well, okay, you haven't lost anything. There were 2 cases that I remember reading. I think there's a few more, but there were 2 studies. One came out a few years ago from the Netherlands that found if you have narcissistic personality disorder, practicing mindfulness can make you more narcissistic.
Right.
So that was an interesting negative. And the other one is if you've recently gone through an emotional trauma that you have not dealt with, then practicing certain types of mindfulness can actually increase that emotional trauma because you haven't dealt with the emotions.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
But again, this is where we want to explore the research. To your point, we can't just explore the research that says mindfulness is amazing and we should all practice it, because actually in many cases it kind of doesn't do much. And it's the same when you look at strengths. So if I take strengths as an example, which is probably another really big area of positive psychology research, most of the research will, probably on this case, 95% of the time, it will tell you identifying, using and developing your strengths on a regular basis is good for your well-being. There are some studies that will say didn't make a huge amount of difference with this group or in this way, but actually there's a significant body of research that says no matter what country, no matter what gender, no matter what, whether it's adversity or positive things in life, leveraging your strengths will actually make a difference. So let's focus on the ones where we've got the robustness, and let's keep an eye on the ones that are still, sound great in theory, but haven't necessarily been replicated and supported in a robust way.
Thank you for that. And I think also another point, which again, I've learned as a marketer, because as marketers, you're always using research to actually support your point, is always check who's commissioned the study in terms of how robust that study actually is, because there's so much data and it's very easy to get very confused when you're trying to make a big decision. And I'm very aware of that in terms of how data can be used to not necessarily support but to confuse a decision of some description.
There's a really good example of this. So the Templeton Foundation in the US, they give $14 million every year for research, roughly, into positive psychology, which is amazing. And they're definitely a lot more open and generous now. But in the early days, because the Templeton Foundation is a Christian organization, some of the research that came out that said religion is good for you, well, kind of would. But the interesting thing is subsequent research, which again, all credit to them, they found that if you are not religious, if you practice some of the things that were found through the research studies of religion is good for you, then you still get the same results. So if you think about the religion is good for you, some of the things they found was pretty much most religions have some form of prayer, mindfulness, mantras, Sufi dancing, whatever it is, there's some form of ritual around mindfulness. Most religions have some form of sense of belonging, connection, etc. Most religions have some sense of meaning, whatever you're attaching that to. So what they then did is, and again, all credit to them, is they then said, well, okay, let's take those key things that some religions give you, and let's take it to people who are not religious, and oh, look, it
same results. That's so interesting. So interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I'm conscious of time, Sue. So, how can people? I could talk to you for the entire day, but how can people actually engage with you and your courses? Tell us more about the Langley Group and how people can actually get to work with you and build on this enormous knowledge base that you've developed.
Thank you, Lawrence. So if you go to langleyGroup.com.au, you'll find out all about what we do from our Langley Group certified trainers, our strengths accreditations, our Mesquite accreditations, etc. If you go to the Langley Group Institute.com, you will find our diploma of positive psychology and wellbeing, which is amazing. Seeing people all around the world doing amazing things with their learning. And if you're interested in ongoing learning, we have a brilliant member community called Learn with Sue. And that's what I was doing this morning. We were talking about self-determination theory, and we were talking about how to find control in the chaos. And basically each month we have in conversation sessions with expert people from positive psychology and neuroscience, etc. And we have the live Learn with Sue sessions where we pick a topic and we delve in and we look at how we apply it. And it's the most fun for people who are really serious about really wanting to flourish, really wanting to learn, to grow. So yeah, so learnwithsue.com.au is another one. Or people can email me, just sue@langleyGroup.com.au, and I promise I respond to every single email. So I hope I get to hear from people.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Sue. Let me acknowledge you for the amazing work you've done over the last 20 years. Thank you for making time in your busy schedule to be with us today and to share some, amazing insights and very practical tools that hopefully has helped people see their own situation slightly differently. So thank you so much, Sue, and thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence.